Roxo Media House.
Welcome back to FORTitude, folks. J.W. Wilson, your host, with my co-host, Brenton Payne, to the far left. The man in the middle is a man by the name of Dr. Keith Cerny, the president and CEO of the Fort Worth Symphony Orchestra. We are brought to you by Captex Bank, our friends over at Captex. Brenton, thank you. Mike Thomas,
Thanks,
as
Mike.
always. We got a good one today. This guy here does quite a bit of things. He's been quite a bit of places as well. Thank you for joining us, Keith. We're honored to have you here in our presence.
I'm glad to be here.
So before we get into the Fort Worth Symphony specifically, you come from a long ways away and been a lot of places, like I said. You were playing music at an early age. When did music find you?
So I actually grew up and taught myself how to sing listening to my parents' Beatles records. That's pretty much the only records we had in the house. And it's kind of fun, actually, because tonight with the Fort Worth Symphony, we have a Beatles tribute concert. So it was bringing back some of those memories. But I had a music teacher in school who suggested I audition for the San Francisco Boys Chorus, which I did and got in and had a chance to sing with the symphony and the opera in San Francisco. And then also was able to start taking piano lessons. And within a couple years after starting on piano lessons, I played my first piano concerto with the Berkeley Youth Orchestra. So,
Are you better at one than the other? Would you say singing versus piano?
so I have sung and I've studied voice because I've coached opera singers, but my primary instrument is piano, and I'm also a conductor.
Very nice.
Did your parents make you take lessons? Like, did they see something in you when you were singing these Beatles tunes? They're like, my goodness, you have something right there.
Well, and usually it was the exact opposite. So I'd begged my parents to buy me a piano since the age of 7, and they said, nah, you'll just quit.
Yeah.
Which is kind of unusual now that I've been a parent. But nonetheless, that was their view. But after I got into the boys' chorus and started progressing through the ranks there, my mom said, well, maybe this kid's worth buying a piano. And she bought me a piano, and I found my own music teacher. And just from the day I started taking lessons, was playing 2 hours a day without any kind of prompting, just because I loved it so much.
What kind of piano?
Oh, this was an old upright. I don't even remember.
It was,
an
but
old upright with ivory keys that were sort of falling off. I mean, it was playable, but it wasn't
Stay in
anything
tune,
special.
kind of?
Yeah, reasonably.
Oh,
Yeah,
good.
reasonably in tune. Yeah.
In San Francisco, that's where you grew up?
I actually grew up in Berkeley. My father
Okay.
was a professor at UC Berkeley, and so we lived in Berkeley.
What kind of professor?
He was a professor of chemistry and nuclear physics.
Oh, wow.
So education has always been pretty paramount in your family growing up, and even to this day, correct?
Very much, yeah. I was. My parents took education very seriously, and my father was a professor. His father had been a professor. My mother had an EDD. I mean, it was a very academic family, and I enjoyed that side of my background as well. But the music really took hold at about age 10.
Did you think you maybe go into the same thing and just teach music like throughout your life?
Actually, in my teens, I wanted to be a concert pianist, and then when I got into my 20s, I wanted to be an opera coach and conductor, and was gearing up to that before I decided to focus on arts administration. So I knew I wanted to be a performer as opposed to a teacher or an academic in music.
Okay, yeah.
You ended up at Cal Berkeley, where you're from, obviously, which is part of the story. But do you have some fond memories of the period of childhood up to Cal Berkeley, high school-ish? What are some of the memories that you have that you could share?
Well, I remember just doing an enormous amount of music, which I really loved. I played this concerto I mentioned. I studied intensively. I played in the California Bach Festival. I sang with San Francisco Symphony and San Francisco Opera as a boy soprano. Played a lot with the Berkeley Contemporary Chamber Players. So I was really heavily immersed in music as a teen.
Fair.
And performing.
And performance. Performance as well. And that's really what I knew I loved to do.
Mm-hmm.
Incredible. So Cal Berkeley hits you. You're studying there. This is a pretty wild time at Cal Berkeley, I think. A lot of things are happening there.
Right, including the big play.
Yes.
Yeah, so I was there that day.
Please tell us.
So this is the famous Stanford play where the band went on the field and Cal managed to win. So this is
Britton. You might have to help Britton.
I thought you were going to talk about some kind of like some kind of 60s thing, or I don't know.
Keith, Britton has no idea what we're talking about.
No, zero idea. I'm thinking
So-
about like Berkeley as just like a calm, like a hippie thing or something like that. And then you say your dad with chemistry. I'm thinking of another guest we had on psychedelic. I'm going crazy places.
Well, there was some of that too, I have to say, having been at Berkeley. But no, I was referring specifically to the big play, and as a big TCU football guy, JW, I know you'll know exactly what play I mean, right?
Of
Maybe you
course.
should tell the audience. You
Of
can probably
course.
describe it
Well, I
better
believe
than I can.
Stanford was ahead, in the last play of the game, it was just the most crazy. The band ran on the field, Britton, just so you're aware. It's probably one of the most famous plays in the history of college football.
I think I've seen
Cal Berkeley lateraled it several times and ran through the crowd, through the band to score and win. It was ridiculous, actually.
Were you there?
I was there at that day for the game. Yeah, it's and everyone had thought that Berkeley would lose, and so the play was called "There Were Too Many Men on the Field." The men being the Stanford band, but of course Berkeley declined the penalty because they just won the game, and they used this very clever rugby style play where they kept doing reverse laterals up the field.
Yeah,
it's one of the. You can find it on YouTube. It's pretty amazing. So I was at Berkeley there. I think that was one of those.
That's great.
That was one of the big moments.
Are you a fan of sports? Do you follow any sports? Just since we're on that topic,
a little bit, not a lot,
not terribly.
I find it takes most of my time just keeping tabs of what musicians are up to. But some sports.
I have been to Cal Berkeley several times just on visits with family and stuff. There's one place that we always try to find it, and it's Founders Rock. Are you familiar with this rock? It's basically where the school was initiated, like in 1860 or something. And I don't know why I even bring this up, but I don't know if you knew what a Founders Rock was, if you ever saw it, but it's where the school was started. It's basically it's hidden by trees and some shrubs and stuff. And it's a chore to actually find the rock. I don't know if you were familiar.
Did you find it?
We never found it. We were obviously searching, and this is back before the internet was very helpful. It's years and years ago. So
interesting. I mean, it's ringing a vague bell, but I never saw it. There is a nuclear power plant that's used under or student reactor under the engineering buildings. I know that's still there.
They let students run a reactor.
This is from years ago. It's mothballed now, but apparently there is. If you know the right basement to go down to, there is a.
You're clearing up a lot of loose ends for me with him discovering the nuclear reactor and being around that rather than the rock.
Indeed. So from Cal Berkeley, you ended up in London on a Fulbright scholarship or Fulbright Fellowship. Excuse me.
That's right.
What was that like?
Fulbright Fellowship, and then an Alfred Hertz Memorial Fellowship from Berkeley. I spent 4 years in London studying music and performing. Studied at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama. Also attended the opera accompanying course at the English National Opera, which was very exciting to have the chance to work with them and study with some really tremendous conductors and a really fabulous pianist. So
very nice.
Spent 4 years doing that, but primarily gearing up to getting a job as a opera accompanist in a German opera house and taking intensive German and doing all those things. And then when I was about 24, I thought, no, I think I'm going to focus on the arts administration side. I was engaged at the time, and my now wife was willing to go to Germany and launch that particular adventure, but I decided arts management probably was going to be the long-term play for
How
me.
long in Germany were you?
Well, I didn't live there. I was gearing up to audition, but it's interesting. Italy has the reputation for opera, but if you look at where the jobs are, there are far, far more jobs in Austria and Germany than there are in Italy.
Sure.
And,
it's also funny what marriage can do to a musician's dreams, isn't it?
Well,
please tell us, Britton.
My wife has always been very supportive.
Mine as well, but it's a hard way to raise a family, right?
It is a hard way to raise a family, indeed.
That led you to some place called Harvard. We call TCU the Harvard of the South, as you probably are aware, but that led you to Harvard Business School, correct?
That's right. So after I came back from London, I actually worked for a couple of years in a Big 8 accounting firm, which really dates me. But in those days, there were 8. So I worked for a couple of years in tax and corporate finance at Touche Ross, a company. And because my thought was before I went to business school, I really wanted to at least have some experience in business. And so did that for a couple of years, and went to
enjoyable
to Harvard.
time.
Yeah, I learned an incredible amount. I was there a couple of years, and it's really extraordinary as I think back on my entire career how much I rely on those 2 years.
Really?
Yeah, just everything from working on auditors, knowing how to read financial statements, just feeling really comfortable with financials. Yeah, I really learned more than I realized at the time.
It's amazing how many musicians are numerically oriented or have a kind of a math. It's odd. You would think that it would be more of the writing side and the creative side, but you find a lot of musicians that have a real numbers background or a real, mathematical and computer science and stuff. What do you think the reason for that is? Or do you think it's...
Well, it's not universal. I certainly know some musicians who are really much more focused on music and the verbal side. But yeah, there are quite a few musicians who do both, including myself, because my undergraduate degrees were in music and physics. And so a lot of mathematics. And then I wound up doing a PhD later in my career through the Open University in the UK in option pricing theory, which is heavy math. So for my whole career, I've enjoyed the interplay between the math side and the music side.
Do you look at music in a kind of almost a numerical format or methodology? Like, does it translate into you like that?
I think for certain kind of repertoire, it's very helpful. Right now, I'm preparing the Bartók Sonata for 2 pianos and percussion, which I'll be performing on our chamber music series this fall with our wonderful keyboard artist, Buddy Bray, and our percussion players. And that particular piece, it's almost like a Swiss watch. I mean, there's so many rhythmic elements built into it, and it takes just a real precise approach to practicing. So for some kind of repertoire, it has an absolutely almost numerical kind of feel. Big romantic piano concerti, not so much, but certainly some more contemporary repertoire, absolutely. And over the years, I've really enjoyed learning and performing a lot of contemporary repertoire. So I think that helps there.
Yeah. I almost get lost in the shuffle when music talk takes over. That's not being a musician. And all that.
What's interesting is you said contemporary, more kind of numbers oriented, and you think about how technology has taken us into computers are based on numbers, right? Like, so it's almost like, is there something behind that, right? But from where we're going, we're just moving into the numbers more, it seems like.
Any notable memories from the time at Harvard? Anything notable worth we could mention?
So I did a big field study with a classmate named Andrew Bartmus for a very famous professor, Stephen Wheelwright, on helping Kodak improve its manufacturing and talking about some of the perils of offshoring. So bear in mind, this was published in 1991. And it's still being referenced in the literature. Oh, wow. So that's pretty cool. I get pings every week or two from ResearchGate saying, someone's requested a copy of your article. So we think we were ahead of the times in the sense that we were pointed out that if you move your manufacturing overseas, it can cost you a lot more money than you think. And that we sort of come full circle from, say, the 90s when lots of companies were offshoring to different parts of Asia, and then a lot of companies now are bringing it back. So,
and this is Kodak, though, right?
This was Kodak Business Imaging Systems Division, and we wrote a Harvard case about it and published this article, and so that was pretty cool. Yeah, I'd say that was the highlight academically of the.
And then from there, you go back to the UK to Open University, where you got.
And that was a part-time thing. I went back to the UK actually to be an associate with McKinsey & Company, the consulting firm, and I did the PhD in my spare time. And that was a part-time program.
People hard.
No, that's that. Actually the way I did it. I think back to that a lot. So my wife and I didn't have kids quite yet, but I took a lot of taxis because my clients were all over London. And I worked very, very long hours at McKinsey, like everyone does. And what I did though is I dedicated one taxi ride per day to work on my PhD. And with the passage of time, and just so I had my laptop in there running my simulations, writing my stuff, and that allowed me to generate enough material that I could then actually finish it when we moved to.
And who says you're a numbers guy, breaking it down to one taxi ride a day? I'm sure you had the amount of time too in a non-Uber or cell phone shows you how long it's going to take you world.
Well, I was writing this in the early 90s, and cell phones were about the size of a building brick, right? They're those huge, heavy things. Yeah. So there really was not sort of broadly used commercial cell phones yet. So in the taxis, I'd either be writing my presentations or I'd be working on this. But I found that worked really well. And actually, that's how I tend to organize my life still. So like I mentioned, I'm preparing this Bartók piece for our chamber music series. I have to be very just meticulous with my practice time because my day job keeps me pretty busy. So every time I sit down at the piano, I really have to know what I'm trying to accomplish in that particular hour, right? I mean, it's great fun to sort of sit at the piano and be leisurely about it, but I just don't have that kind of time at the moment. So I have to be very, very focused about what I'm trying to get out of it.
So we can fast forward a little bit in your career because you've done quite a few things, but obviously I think our point here is to get to the Fort Worth Symphony, but you had to stop down at the San Francisco Opera for 3 or 4 years. You were the executive director of the CFO of the San Francisco Opera, so you're now in the upper echelon of the musical, and this is a big one too, the San Francisco Opera. I'm vaguely familiar, but that in itself is a substantial deal. How was that for you?
Well, that was a fantastic experience. I had already been a full partner at Accenture for 4 years and was looking to make my move into arts administration. And they had a vacancy at the number 2 level with the chief operating officer and chief financial officer. And so I was delighted to have that offer and work for them for 3 years.
And then you went to another spot where we were talking before you got here. When I used to try to learn the guitar, I wanted to play the guitar. I'd go to tablature for a company called Sheets Music Plus. idiots that can't play go there for the easy way to play a song on the guitar. Come to find out, you were running this company for the period of 2-3 years, correct?
That's right. I also was CEO of Sheet Music Plus and worked very closely with the founder and the venture capitalists who were gearing it up for sale. And it actually has since been sold. My 2 years there, I spent really virtually all my time working on modernizing the data infrastructure. So we actually built a whole new data center at 365 Main from the ground up, and we're able to compress the data center from essentially a big floor in a basement and office building to a rack and a half.
Wow.
So that was
us non-musicians. Thank you very much for the help there. Because
are those sheets being used somewhere still? Sorry, Jada.
No. Yeah, that business they sold it to one of the big music publishers. I don't remember which one, but the business was very successful. We had, when I was there, about 1 million titles you could buy online, and it was an interesting example of how the internet is very powerful because we could compete against much larger organizations, say on Amazon, because Amazon wanted to sell the high volume music that everybody wants to buy. So Pachelbel's Canon or fake books for Beatles or those kinds of things. But we could be on the long tail of the distribution and sell things that people only bought once or twice a year all over the world and still be able to make money on that. And so I didn't found this business, Nick Babchuk did. It was a very clever business and very successful.
That niche market, if you will.
The niche market. And it's really would make a textbook example of how a business can compete against companies, 1,000, 10,000 times their size if they're focused on just the right kind of niche.
And there you go on to the as general director and CEO of the Dallas Opera for 8 years.
Nearly 8 years there, yeah.
So, which led you further on to the Calgary Opera. It's one of the largest operas in the whole world. I'm familiar with these guys. What is it about the opera business? Obviously, your musical background, I believe, is that answer, but you seem to have a thing for the operas, and you obviously successful operas in that. What's going on there?
So one of the things I enjoy about opera is it blends together the orchestral playing, the singing, and also adds all the theatrical elements on stage. And in fact, in our work together, Robert Spano and I, the Fort Worth Symphony's music director, we both enjoy that theatrical side on some of our productions. And we've been introducing more of those kinds of elements in what we do, whether it's through evenings of Wagner or ballet or using projections. So these are all elements that we're bringing into the symphonic experience.
And what about Canada? Because we've got, like the Van Cliburn, there's a lot of Canada arts and that humanities stuff, and then we're getting that here. What do you think the reason for that is?
Canada is a very vibrant art scene, and Calgary in particular is home to the Honens International Piano Competition and Alberta Ballet. So, of course, here in Fort Worth, we have the very, very famous Cliburn International Piano Competition. Honens would say they're of that same, exalted level from a piano competition point of view. So there's a lot of interest in the arts in Canada. One of the reasons is that a typical Canadian arts organization is funded about a third by the three levels of government, whereas apart from the pandemic years in the U.S. environment, it's typically maybe 1% comes from government sources. So that's one difference, and it definitely makes it easier to know you have that solid base of support.
Are you learning along these director lines, things that work, don't work, which obviously led you to the Fort Worth Symphony, but are you learning the methods in which they build audiences, build funds, all the things that you now utilize at the symphony? Is it fair to say that's where all this came from?
Yes, I've been working in arts management either as a consultant or line exec for about 25 years. And although I'll say one of the fun things about what I do is I have to learn new things every day, I've certainly had a lot of experience.
You seem like quite the learned man, I have to guess, based on your resume. So
it's interesting what trends are new, what trends are different, or I should say what trends are new, what are the same. So 25 years ago, people were complaining about audiences disappearing, and people have been actually complaining about that since the time of Mozart. So that's not to say we don't have to work hard to develop new audiences, because we do, but that same theme has been around for 200 years, more probably. What really has been new since I worked with the Fort Worth Symphony, of course, is managing a symphony through a global pandemic, and that forced us just to rethink absolutely everything that we do to get through that period of time. And we did it very successfully and are now working to pull out. But it really required just a total rethink sort of a disruptor mentality to the business, although in this case, the disruptor was coming from the outside.
And I know he'll have some questions further on the pandemic, but so we arrive at the Fort Worth Symphony where you're president and CEO now. So you're in Fort Worth, Texas. I know you're happy to be here. I've known you for quite some time now. Tell us what it means, or first, let's maybe start at the beginning. What exactly is a symphony, and what's the purpose of a symphony in the world of music? Just so the people who don't understand quite what's going on.
Sure. So we have about 65 musicians in our core orchestra, and our service, our mission really is around community service, and that has different kinds of elements of providing great orchestral playing of different kinds, maybe a summer festival. We have a very, very large education program, and pre-pandemic, we used to reach about 200,000 people a year. That broke down very roughly as about 65,000 in our education program, 35,000 through our summer festival, and then the rest through our symphonic and pops programming. Historically, Fort Worth Symphony has had one of the largest education programs in the country, and that predates me by a long time. That's great work by my predecessors, but it's an important part of what we do. Sure. We bring all those elements together. We're really here to be of the community, but also serve the community.
Absolutely.
Is it something that makes a city, better than another city by, we have a symphony orchestra, right? Like, is there like some echelon that it reaches that obviously larger cities have these, but what's your take on that?
So it's incredibly important for cities to have the arts, in my view. And in fact, I've done some work in my consulting days, non-music consulting days, on corporate relocations. And so one of the things that really draws companies to cities is the quality of life. Do they have sports teams? What are they? Do they have also performing arts and museums? Mm-hmm. And this is a really central part of civic life. And I think many, many cities of all different sizes recognize that. Mm-hmm. And, you take a smaller community like Wichita Falls that I've done some work in, they're very proud of all the things they do there. And they're constantly striving to bring more exhibits to their museum, more music, more kinds of entertainment and quality of life to their residents, and that's a city of about 100,000. Mm-hmm. When you get to a very large city like Fort Worth or Dallas, it's all about that cultural excitement, and that's really important, I think, for any city to have, really of any size.
Is there competitive nature to like us with Dallas? Like, look what we did this Beatles deal, and like we're better here, like kind of outshowing the other.
So we really think of ourselves as being one of two top-tier symphonies in the Metroplex. So Metroplex now has about 8 million people, and that's plenty big to support two international calibers of symphonies. So we don't really think of it as head-to-head competition. We do strive to be the best we can be artistically, and with the appointment of our new music director, Robert Spano, we've really made a big step forward. He just brings such a wealth of experience and knowledge and contacts and musicians that he wants to work with. So that's really elevated what we do considerably.
Yeah.
Nice. I've always believed the symphony, and these are my words, but it's one of the grandest, most complex methods of performing music. Is that fair to say? I mean, more goes into a symphony than probably anything musically. I know there's a lot of practice, but it's the amount of members. You mentioned 65. There's just so much going on, the conducting, the practicing, all the choosing of the pieces, all the things that go into it makes it got to be the most complex performance there is, right?
It's a very complicated business, and budget size is deceptive in the sense that our budget is much smaller than some of the largest orchestras in the U.S., which might have budgets of $100 million or more. But often we do 80 or more % of many performances. So one of our challenges is how do we, with a staff of 28 people, produce 200 concerts a year? And the answer is we have to be incredibly efficient to be able to make that happen. Symphonies are very complex organizations. We have a work group of musicians that we need to keep working well together. Our work group is unionized. Most symphonies are. That adds other elements of we need to make sure we're following the contract very precisely, and everybody is really working well together.
And then did those performers then have other – they don't have like full-time job. They're musicians, but do they get to go to other places and perform and things like that?
So our musicians are on a 46-week contract, so they have 6 weeks of preparation time in the summer, but in that time they are able to go work in other festivals if they choose. Many of them teach. They teach at TCU. They teach at UAT. So they'll teach at universities, they'll teach privately, they'll do gigs on the side, and that's something that we encourage. We set the schedule each week, typically at least a month in advance, although we give advance warning. And beyond that, how they organize their preparation time and other activities is very much up to them. But it's expected that they will do that.
Average salary of a symphonic cellist, let's say. I mean, do some instruments get paid more than others?
So we pay more to the principals than we do to section players. So in a section like cellos, the principal will earn more than the section player.
Okay.
And we do everything we can for them. It's a tough economic environment
Sure.
at the moment. So we're
Average salary, just ballpark. I mean, it doesn't even have to be the cellist.
so those are consistent. I mean, I don't have the exact numbers to mind, but the section musicians will earn. I think this year's contract is in the high 50s before doubling fees or overtime or some of those other kinds of things.
Sure.
And then principals will earn typically 25% more than that, something like that.
But still, in this day and age, that's a real love for music if you're going and doing this kind of work, right?
Sure.
I mean, you're doing it for the music aspect, not for the going to vacation on Hawaii this summer.
Right. I mean, we are very fortunate to have many dedicated musicians that, they focus their whole life often since a very young age on this. And we're just thrilled they want to be part of the Fort Worth community and be part of the Fort Worth Symphony.
And since we're on money, Keith, could you tell us about what does it cost to run a symphony per year? Is it you mentioned $100 million for some of these world class symphonies?
The largest ones. Our budget this year is about $15 million. The biggest driver of the cost structure of a symphony is how many musicians they have in the corps and what they pay corps members.
Sure. And that $15 million college budget, where is that money coming from? So people understand how money is made.
So we have earned revenue, which is split roughly evenly between ticket sales and some of our partnerships with organizations like Fort Worth Opera and Texas Ballet Theater, the Clyburn when they're having their competition, PAFW, who manages Bass Hall, engages us for their education programs. So we have earned revenue that does not come directly from ticket sales. And that produces a good chunk of what we do. We typically have an endowment draw, which covers about 10% of our operating expenses. And then the remaining, which is always more than 50%, is from fundraising.
So fundraising is a big part of most symphonies, if not all symphonies.
Right. I mean, fundraising is an extraordinarily important part of what we do. And in fact, having worked, as you mentioned earlier, JW, in opera for quite a few years, opera companies have been planning for years for a world where tickets only cover 10 to 15% of the budget. I mean, many aren't there yet, but every year, typically, that pie chart shifts so that ticket sales become a lower part of the percentage, a lower percentage of the total, and the fundraising becomes.
Is it still true, Keith, that since I think you made a comment about Mozart, that people are getting people to come back to the symphony or come to the symphony in general? Is that, you said that's still a thing? What are you doing? What is the symphony doing to entice people to come to the symphony, if that's the right word?
Sure, we think a lot about what is going to sell when we program, especially in our pop special series. We're dramatically expanding our movies because a lot of symphonies will do movies with full orchestra, and that sells really well. We had big success with that with Star Wars last fall, our first ever Star Wars program. In the upcoming season, the 23-24, we'll be doing our first ever Harry Potter film. Typically, these sell very well.
Explain that real quick. Like a Harry Potter film, you're showing the film on a screen in Bass Hall with the symphony playing along. All the musical pieces,
right?
Correct.
So this is licensed to the owner, and in Star Wars case, it's through Disney. So we negotiate with Disney on what the fee will be for, if we do 3 performances, what those 3 performances are. And then there's a screen above the orchestra. The orchestra sits on stage. And the conductor then has various tools to keep the playing synchronized, or I should say, they're conducting synchronized with the movie. And
very
this could
popular
be clip
stuff.
Tracks or other methods.
These are very popular. These pop series.
These are very popular. So we're doing more with that because every dollar of margin we could generate on that means a dollar less that we have to fundraise. We also had a big success in the last couple of years with some video game projects, and we're doing more of those. And then in 23-24, we're also doing our first immersive art experience with orchestra.
Oh, nice.
to tap into the interest in immersive Van Gogh and so forth. So we hope those will sell really well.
And bring the younger audience. I was thinking about it, with technology, I can pull up a sample of any orchestra. I mean, it's not the same, but this is what you're competing against, is this instantaneous, I don't have to go somewhere, get dressed up, go sit down. There's nothing that matches the live, like, symphonic experience, right? But explaining that to my 14 or 15-year-old who's just scrolling it's just, I don't understand how you bridge that gap. It's got to be.
Britton, he has four boys, so he probably knows a thing or two about that.
Well, we had them all start play instruments, so that definitely helps. But getting people to come to a theater, yes, take some attention, and we find these movies, video games, immersive experiences we think are very strong. Tribute bands are very strong, and one of the things that I do chuckle about pretty often is that all the bands that were hot and new when I was in high school and college, right, were cutting edge, and now they're the focus of our tribute series.
Sure. Yeah.
So, I remember Freddie Mercury, right, with Queen, was for its time very edgy, and he certainly was a very edgy person. And now it's this very tame, come for an evening entertainment. And it's, it's the same with the Eagles, the same with the Beatles, any of these kind of tributes.
Well, when I was thinking, when you're talking about doing the films, I was thinking we used to do this thing in college where we would, on the second roar of the Lion, play The Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd while watching The Wizard of Oz. You could do that. I mean, I would come and see that. I would just a little idea there, and I think JW would join me at that for sure.
Indeed. Before I forget to ask you, I know we were talking about the music now, but you mentioned the union, the symphony's unionized. I think in this part of the world, some people around here probably have a bad interpretation of what a union is. That's a bigger thing up in the Northeast, I think. Why is a union important for the symphony, and how does that go for you in negotiations?
So we work very closely with the American Federation of Musicians at a local and national level, and they were an absolutely fabulous partner through the pandemic because we had to come up with work rules that kept everyone safe, that the musicians were comfortable with, so we could perform for live audiences. In fact, the Fort Worth Symphony was one of the first symphonies in the U.S. to resume live performances. We were performing to live audiences with live musicians in September of 2020, and that was a really big deal. So we work very closely with the Players Committee that represents the musicians, and Artistic Advisory Committee, and also the union. The agreement is 70, 80 pages long, and every paragraph there is for a reason, so that we can take care of our people and also produce a great artistic result. I'm particularly pleased with the close collaboration that we have here in Fort Worth between the administrative staff and the musicians. And in fact, looking at my past jobs, this has always been a priority for me. It wasn't Dallas, it wasn't San Francisco, it wasn't Calgary. I think those relationships are incredibly, incredibly important.
Let's kind of flip gears now back to you and the music. Could you tell us, an audience, what does your daily life, your daily job look like for someone who's running a symphony?
Well, I often start the day by getting up and playing the piano, because I'm always working on some new piece of music or for some sort of side project, and it does get me in the mood for the day. Does
Jennifer appreciate this?
Well, it depends. So I have a lovely grand piano that we've owned for years, but I also have a high-end keyboard with headphones, so that if she's heard the same piece a lot, she gets a break. So I do alternate between those.
Do you have one at the office too?
I don't have one at the office, just because during the workday it would be hard to sort of find the concentrated time given just all the things that happen. But I have one, the grand downstairs.
I can see the board. The board's like, well, he's practicing it for his thing. I mean, he's not doing the work of the deal. Yeah. Okay. So you do that. You start.
So I do that, and we have it. One of the things I think is distinctive about running a symphony is it's a very much a real-time operation, and stuff happens all the time. We do plan several years ahead. In fact, I'm working right now with our wonderful music director. I'm planning the 24-25 season, and we had various calls and conferences about that earlier. But a lot of what we do is, this week's a great example. How do we readjust the rehearsal schedule because of all the weather issues?
Mm-hmm.
And how do we make sure that we have enough time to get the Beatles show on? How is that affecting ticket sales? How can we encourage people to come? Because, in fact, by tonight, hopefully everything will be pretty much back to normal. So there's a very real-time aspect to that. And I work very closely with just this amazing team that I've been able to put in place with our chief marketing officer, head of development, and head of operations, head of human resources, which is a very important job for us, and then, of course, our CFO. So I have a lot of meetings and a lot of discussions. One of the sides of the job that I most enjoy is working with our music director of programming, and also because Bass Hole is so close to our offices, like this afternoon, I can pop over, listen to a bit of rehearsal, make sure I feel comfortable, everything's coming together for tonight, and then go back to more of the sort of planning and administrative side of things.
What about the other side? What are some struggles that you are constantly in your purview?
So raising money, reality of any arts organization in the U.S. is that we have to raise an enormous amount of money. And working with my board and development teams, I added up once. I've worked on raising well over $100 million in my time in Texas alone for operations and endowment and other kinds of capital projects. So the raising money side is with me, literally 24/7, 365. I had 1 year in a 20-year line exec career in arts management. I had 1 year where my development director and I had raised so much money in advance that we had a year where we knew exactly where the money was coming from, and
nice.
We focused on producing great works on stage, and they didn't have that pressure. But that was once, and I think typically if you talk to any arts CEO, they're going to say the same thing. It's just we're very dependent on fundraising. We need to make sure we have the relationships in place so that we can talk to people about the giving. We need to have an artistic product that we're really proud of.
Sure.
And I also find having a very tight and lean operation impresses a lot of potential donors to be more generous. They really want to know that if they give us any amount of money, from a small amount to a very large amount, that we're going to use every dollar really, really carefully.
I love hearing that. And that's kind of my next question is why people obviously give to the symphony, but why should people give to the symphony? What is in it for them? And why do people give to the symphony more than why should they? Why do they?
This guy's a Harvard PhD. That's one reason right there. Just what he just said. I think that you can't argue with that. So many times with sorry, this question was for you, Keith.
But all right, but jump in. That's fine.
I'm promoting this because I think so many times with nonprofits, the compassion is there. It's in you. You wake up and play the piano. But then you get to the office and it's like, I have no business. A lot of the folks they don't have the business sense. They don't know how to do that. And you're very unique in the sense that you went and did the business thing. And I can only imagine what that conversation with your now wife was like, because my grandfather was a musician and had the same with my grandmother of, okay, you're going to be a performing musician, but what are you going to do in the other time? And if you look at your life, it took a different path then. So I commend you for that. But sorry, I didn't mean to answer for you there.
That's fine. The business side is incredibly important, and working with our head of operations who I hired last summer, John Clapper, who was a professional bassoonist, in orchestras, and then became head of operations. We now understand our margins on everything in a way that we didn't before. And when we promote symphonic works, everyone knows we have to fundraise for that, right? And they accept it. We're never going to have a program of a big Mahler symphony that's going to pay for itself for ticket sales. It's just not going to happen here or anywhere else. But when we're doing a pop show, we want to make something that's high quality entertainment that draws people, and we make margin. We never make a profit, but we want to make margin on that. And even on something like these tribute bands, there's often multiple variants, or video games, there's multiple options. So we have to really understand, okay, well, this one will sell a little bit better, but their costs of what they're going to expect is actually higher. So when we look at that net margin, we might go for something that doesn't sell quite as well, but is actually considerably less expensive. So building all that into our thought process is super important. From a fundraising point of view, what I've found, various things get people excited. Education is always something people are really interested in, bringing on the next generation and serving underserved communities. That's one area. Projects that combine unique elements, for example. So if we're doing a symphonic program and we're partnering with a ballet where the orchestra and the dance company share the stage, that's the kind of project that gets people intrigued because they don't see that very often. Getting someone to underwrite a sort of bread and butter soloist with the orchestra, happens sometimes. And if they're a big name, okay, we may be able to do that. But generally, people are looking for something where it has a unique aspect. This spring, we're going to be presenting Haydn's Creation with Robert conducting, and we've engaged this very famous visual designer, projections designer named Elaine J. McCarthy, who's done a lot of work on Broadway, and she's doing these really extraordinary immersive visual designs for the soloists and chorus. And in that particular case, the orchestra will be in the pit. But these are the kind of projects that personally I found have been easier to fundraise for than some others.
Well, and think about it. You have in all of the things you just named, you have experience in each of them. As a performer, the technology aspect with the sheet music, the discussion. It's like when you were going through those, I was thinking about your experience. It lends itself to each of that. So I think we're very lucky to have a guy like you here.
Yeah, most would agree with you, Renton.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, you've had the privilege of working with a couple conductors, originally Miguel Harth-Bedoya and now the Robert Spano that you speak of. What a gift this must be for someone in your position. But tell us, we know about Miguel from previous discussions outside of you, but tell us a bit about Robert Spano, if you don't mind.
Sure. So when I joined the symphony in January of 2019, I knew that one of my big responsibilities would be to work with the board chair and the music director search committee to recruit a new music director, because Miguel had by that point announced that he was wrapping up his tenure after 20 years. And we had a committee which included our chairman, of course, myself, one other staff person, and musicians, and another board member, but a total committee of 6. And we brought in a number of candidates to work with the orchestra and just see whether that chemistry was there. Mm-hmm. Everyone who was brought in cleared the bar in terms of their experience and resume, but there is a lot of chemistry with orchestras, and some orchestras will respond really well to a particular conductor and others not so much. So about that same time, I was negotiating with Robert Spano to be our principal guest conductor, and we did complete that in spring of 19. And then, of course, before very long, we were in February of 20 when COVID hit, and that just upended the entire music business. Mm-hmm. And Robert Spano had been at Atlanta for 20 years and was wrapping up to focus more on opera and composition. And then, of course, COVID was especially hard on opera companies because it's not impossible, but it's much harder to sing on a mask, and opera is such a theatrical experience. So our board chair, Mercedes Bass, talked with Robert. I talked with Robert. We were able to sort of persuade him to become part of our organization. And we are amazingly lucky to have a conductor of his,
surely,
not only his stature, because he has a big career, but he is also one of the absolute best colleagues I've ever worked with. And that is just so rewarding for me and my team to be able to support someone who is as talented as he is, but is also just so gracious and understanding and flexible about all of the other elements that wrap around a musical performance. And so that's just really, I think, a huge win for the Fort Worth Symphony to have him here.
Ms. Canifax, please forgive me for asking this question. What is the name of this? That was our music teacher.
Right. She's listening from upstairs now.
It's the stick. What is the name of the
baton?
The baton.
Yes.
How many batons would somebody like this
Robert Spano have?
Yes.
That's
on average.
That's a great question. I'll have to ask him. I would guess he has a favorite few, and he probably has another 10 in a drawer somewhere.
Yeah. Are they kept in cases? Do we bring them in some type of sock? Like a.
So I own
made out of.
So you have batons sometimes in cases. There's little tubes that they can travel in so they don't break in your shoulder bag, because they are quite delicate. So you have to take care of
wooden?
them.
Ivory?
Wooden, maybe sometimes even plastic with cork base. There's a whole variety of different styles and approaches, and it's very personal what conductors like. Some like very long batons, some like shorter batons.
And are we looking for the sound when we begin? The calling everyone together on the sheet music or on the podium. I don't know what's the.
Well, you know, that comes from the old Toscanini recordings. I'm actually trying to think now that you mentioned it. If ever in my career I've actually seen a conductor do that, I think it would probably be considered kind of rude to sort of tap the music stand like
really?
that. So typically, what happens is the personnel manager will announce, you know, end of break or start time, and contemporary orchestras are very disciplined, so they know just to kind of, if they're not already settled in, to settle. But it's interesting you raised that, because I'm trying to think if I have ever seen it. I don't think it would go down well, because it would be seen as kind of imperious, and the orchestra would feel like, well, we're already here at attention. Just get started, right? Why do you need to do that?
But what if you'd have a musician like me who just had to get that final bit of conversation,
right?
To a musician like yours, I just had to tell you.
I think rehearsal would have worked those kinks out. I'm just guessing. And Keith,
rehearsal? What's that?
Maybe a better question for a conductor is how hard is it? Most people see what they see, but how hard is it to be a conductor? We know it's not just waving a baton. There's a lot more going on.
There's an enormous amount to what goes into conducting, and some of it is very tangible and specific around how what the conductor is doing interacts with the score. Mm-hmm. And some of it is more existential, in that if the orchestra respects the conductor and thinks they have good musical ideas, they will just play better right out of the gate. So the old saying is that half of how an orchestra sounds is whether they respect the conductor or not.
Really?
And the other is about what the conductor does. The other element that, as we went through the music director search process, that I looked for a lot, because of course I am a conductor and have studied with some really wonderful conductors in the past, is not only what they do in terms of communication through their gesture and the use of the bass horn, but how they use the rehearsal time. And there are some conductors who will get up in front of the orchestra and communicate very well and look spectacular, and when they stop, they're finding it more difficult to know really what to adjust. Now, theoretically, if they were absolutely perfect as a conductor, everything would be communicated so they'd never have to say anything. In practice, though, conductors do stop and they make adjustments. And watching as they shift from more of the jukebox approach, if you will, to what they actually say to an orchestra, how they take charge in those first few minutes is a really big factor. And as we went through the music director search process, I mean, all were very accomplished conductors, but they had very different approaches to this.
Right. And you knew your orchestra, and I would imagine you were able to say to the board or whomever that this one's like, I could tell there's a chemistry. There's
a chemistry, right?
Yeah.
And we wanted someone who, there's the on podium of work, of course, but music directors also have a big role in running auditions and a lot of aspects, programming, and a lot of aspects working with me and the players committee that are off podium. And then we also wanted someone who is donor friendly and can talk to people at different kind of levels.
Yeah.
And Robert is very good at this too. The ideal, particularly at a community of this size, is to have someone, obviously, who can talk at a very detailed level, because Robert is such an accomplished musician, but someone who can talk to someone who is an enthusiastic amateur without making them feel self-conscious, right? And some conductors are able to do that, and some conductors just can't sort of simplify what they do to a layman's term and feel level, feel comfortable with that. And Robert is he's very personable and very good with people, and that's a big plus.
Yeah. You're a musician, obviously. The people in this, the performers in the symphony itself. How good are these musicians, Keith? Are these? We know they have a talent. There's no question about that. But how good of musicians are these people?
Well, we have a really extraordinary group of musicians, and just to give a little bit of a benchmark on, how do we know they're really good nationally, is when we hold auditions by contract. We advertise in a particular way. We hold national auditions. We will typically get 100, maybe 150 applicants for one position.
Oh, wow.
And so by the time we've gone through the whole process, and we may hear 30, 40, 50 musicians in a live audition, maybe more, all behind screens, all the way up to the final round. By the time that process is at the end, I mean, we picked spectacular players. Now, as CEO, I have no direct role in that. That's the musicians and on the individual audition committees, and the music director do all of that. My role in this is to make sure that the process follows the contract, and if there's any questions about the process to get involved. But I don't get involved directly in the audition process. That's very much the music director.
Is that a very private thing? Like you wouldn't allow us to come and watch that audition?
So auditions are closed.
Okay.
And so I've sat in final rounds for principals. So when we're hiring section players, they are behind screens. When we hire principals, they're behind screens till the final stage. But then
you mean you can't see them? So
you cannot see them.
Oh.
You can't see who they are. You can't see how old they are. You can't see what gender they are. You can't see anything.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
We pad the floors so you can't even
hear the high
heels versus flat shoes.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we go to a lot of lengths to keep that process as confidential as possible. Now with principals, we have a situation where they do have to be visible because part of what they do is interact with their other principal colleagues.
We do the same with our guests, a similar thing. So JW did that with you already.
And so I do sit in the principal of the final rounds of principal auditions. So those are really
Has there
interesting
ever
to
been
watch.
like a really tough decision? I mean, say between two principals, it's like
Between P2? Oh, absolutely. And we go through audition processes, and we always hope that we'll have a winner. We will often have a backup, so that if the winner, for whatever reason, doesn't accept the contract, we will have a backup as well. I mean, that's what we would hope in the outcome. And these auditions are very competitive. We draw amazing people, with extraordinary pedigrees of all different ages and backgrounds.
Yeah, that would be interesting to see something like that.
No doubt. That's fascinating stuff to share with us. One of the questions I've always wondered personally, Michael, our first chair violinist, fantastic violinist. We all know this. I know he plays a Stradivarius, correct?
He does.
And how does, because you hear these stories every once in a while, how does a Stradivarius make his way into Michael's hands for this?
If I get it at reverb.com or some used music site, is where
You can probably pick one off for $10, maybe 12.
Guitar Center.
pawn shop around here.
Yeah. So the Fort Worth Symphony is incredibly fortunate that we have not 2 Stradivarii, but 2.
Okay.
And these are worth many, many millions of dollars, and we're very fortunate that 2 donors generously loan the instruments. So with high-end string instruments, they're much better off being played than being in some locked vault somewhere, because as they're played, the pores open up or stay open, so the quality of sound is really better for them being played. Of course, if they're then not in a vault, other things can happen, right? So that's why insurance was created. But we're incredibly fortunate to have 2 different donors who have loaned for really many years these extraordinary instruments.
But do they go back and forth, or is it like I'll use that at the actual group rehearsals, but I'm just going to use my cheaper one here? You know what I mean? Do you allow for them to travel?
So this is all very carefully negotiated with the donors, but they are allowed to take them home and practice with them at home. If they go on an extended holiday, they'll go into a vault for safety. And if they need repair, there's very strict rules about who's allowed to repair them. And often the people who repair them are not local. So they'll go off to halfway across the U.S. because there's the world expert on making repairs.
Standard USPS shipping, or how?
They carry them by hand.
You probably don't throw it in the trunk of the car and head off down the road. You probably put it in a seatbelt.
What type of insurance would you like with this FedEx shipment today?
No, they transport them literally by hand.
Any other bin, that type of deal?
Right. Or, I mean, I think in extreme cases, even buy their own seat, but that varies on kind of what the plan is.
That would make sense.
Oh, that would be interesting.
Because you don't want it being, so, I mean.
Sure. We don't want to get too into the weeds on it, but
Any other musicians or instruments of that similar story? Are they donated from donors, like the cellists or any of that stuff?
So in terms of loans from donors, those are the main 2. I mean, one of the ongoing challenges always for orchestral musicians is making sure that they can afford and buy very high quality instruments. We actually have an instrument loan program, so if someone wants to borrow money from the association and pay us back for buying instrument,
nice.
We can do that. And we actually provide insurance now for the musicians for their instruments up to certain limits.
That's nice.
But it's I mean, high-end instruments, particularly string instruments, can cost a lot. And There's also for string instruments the bow, and I mean, one can spend $250,000 on a bow for a violin.
Seriously?
Too. Yeah.
Horsehair?
Horsehair, yeah, because it's all about the balance and precision and the pedigree and the
Pedigree of the horse or pedigree of
the bow, right? So for that kind of money, I mean, it would be a named bow, and you would have a provenance, and you can check it. But in addition to just the cost of violin, there is also then bows can set you back.
Where's the best bow manufacturing facility in the world?
You know, I don't know the answer to that question.
We finally stumped him. All right.
Yes.
Good job.
I will have to work on that one.
That's been a fascinating look, Keith, for sure. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
What's the future for the symphony look like in your eyes right now?
Well, artistically, we're incredibly excited because not only do we have Robert, but this extraordinary principal guest conductor, Kevin John Edusei, who's making his debut with us later this month. At TBU. Debut is PGC. He's already been here before. So he's terrific. I think artistically we're in an extraordinary place. And even since Robert was named music director, we filled 9 vacancies in the orchestra with really extraordinary players. So all of those are coming together really, really well. We are focused on fundraising. We're still trying to bring audiences back post-COVID. We're not there yet. We haven't been hit as badly as some symphonies, which have been just absolutely clobbered, but we're definitely seeing declines of 20-25% on ticket sales, and that does really hurt. So we're trying to bring them back. Inflation is a big factor. It's very high at the moment, and we are not able to pass along cost increases through ticket sales. Right? So if you go buy a dozen eggs, the cost of a dozen eggs right now is definitely reflective of inflation. Our ticket prices essentially are virtually flat because we can't pass those costs along. But our costs are growing with inflation. So this is a we're spending a lot of time thinking about this.
Video game thing is huge. I see my son; he's able to play, learning the Minecraft songs and on the piano, and I think you go do that. I mean, you're going to get this guy with his kids there, or even composing music for video games. I'm seeing a lot of artists that I listen to. They're entering that video game genre as another outlet of distributing their music. So I think you going into the places and the visual thing that you've talked about too, I think is awesome that you guys are going into kind of uncharted territories like that.
Well, Keith, thank you for the time. Before we go, we like to ask our guests a final question. It's the tough one, but aside from family affairs, wife, children, all the things in dealing with family, do you have a best day of your entire life you could share with us?
Aside from families, and family and
anything
music,
with family to do. Music can be fine,
music
but anything
can be
to do
fine.
with family, because everybody wants to answer my marriage or my birth of my kids. Anything aside from that?
So musically, I think I was sort of high point, or one of the handful of high points in my life was being at La Scala, seeing Barenboim conduct one of the big Wagner operas, and it just was an absolutely extraordinary performance in this very, very famous place. So that was really special. Unfortunately, in that particular trip, I wasn't with Jennifer, my wife, but the music was absolutely memorable. So a lot of the non-family high points for me have been music. I also love to be in New Mexico. I love to hike in New Mexico. So that's a thing that's always been part of what I enjoy. So
you are a busy fella.
Yes, thank you. That first memory, you have the baton still? The baton?
I do. I have a few still at home.
That you had from that performance?
So this was a performance that I attended, but I do have the baton from some of the orchestras I've conducted. Yes, I do.
I'm guessing you didn't tap on the podium either.
No, it's interesting. We chatted about that. I'll have to think about that. Whether I think that went out quite a while ago.
Since Looney Tunes,
since
which
Looney
is the
Tunes,
reference that
right? Bugs Bunny can get away with it. I don't know about anybody else.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Dr. Keith Cerny, President and CEO of the Fort Worth Symphony. Thank you for watching FORTitude, and thank you, Captex Bank. We appreciate your support. Until next time.
Thank you.
Roxo Media House.